So, imagine that lone trail just dropped, and you saved up a shitload of random, and you just want to get one copy of Mealsies, just one. Oh shit! You got lucky. You got Mumu within, let's say, around 40 pulls. Great. Time to cash in with the remaining Arundum you have, and, start saving again. But then, your demons start talking.
Your arts aren't working. How can that be?
You black out. When you come to, you realize you spent 200 pulls. And now you have a Holiak. Where'd she come from? If this strange set of sequences is familiar to you, you'd be me. Yep, that's what happened to me. Spent 200 pulls on Holiak even though I just wanted Mealsies. So, was all that worth it? Was she worth almost 200 pulls? But in all seriousness, I wanted to make this video to showcase an operator that people generally think is bad. Now, I'm not trying to convince anyone that she isn't. This video will just serve as a casual guide for people that know she's bad, but still want to find the use cases for her and find out what she can actually do in a stage. Now, I'll divide this video into 3 parts. First part being a general overview of what she does, her talents, skills, and module. Second part is on how you would want to use her in a normal stage, and who you would want to pair her up with. And third is how to recognize when she can maximize the amount of DPS she has, and comparing said DPS to her contemporaries. Keep in mind, I consider myself as someone who is very knowledgeable about Arknights, as I have been playing since year 1, ever since Blaze came out, but I am definitely not one of those people that can calculate and clear stages with ultra high precision. Take this video as someone who is semi-casual, who just likes to min-max things from time to time. So, without further ado, here is Holiak. For part 1, I'll go over her entire kit and go over what each talent and skill actually does for Holiak's performance. Holiak is of course a core caster. She deals arts damage and has average stats all across the board. Her first talent is called Inherited End, and it lets her deal increased damage to aerial enemies, silencing them in the process. This talent is the core of Holiak's entire kit, as all her skills inflict levitate, turning normal ground enemies into aerial enemies. The silence part of the talent is really niche. Silence by itself is already niche, of course, since it's never really clear if an enemy's mechanic is silenceable or not. But then it's also luck behind her having to hit aerial enemies. There's just much better alternatives if you want someone to silence an enemy. Moving on to her second talent, called Bygone Wings. It's useless. Now, despite its cool name, this talent just makes it so that all enemies within her range above 80% HP have weightlessness, which reduces their weight value by 1. For those that don't know, weight 4 and above enemies have the duration of which they are affected by levitate. That's it. So this talent basically makes all weight 4 enemies in range be affected by the full duration of levitate. And I guess this synergizes with shifters, of course, but there's also the completely unnecessary restriction of 80% HP or more. It is such a needlessly restricting downside to a talent that's not even very good in the first place. Even if this talent was buffed to 50% HP or above, it wouldn't even be that amazing. Especially since for her skill 2, the duration of levitate is negligible in the first place, and her skill 3 levitates every attack, so it never really matters for Holiak's personal damage. Effectively, Holiak has one talent. Onto her module, it improves her first talent, making it so that Holiak deals even more damage to aerial targets. There's also, of course, the trait change of all attacks ignoring 10 arts resistance. It's honestly not a bad module, all things considered. Ignoring 10 res is always good, and I would 100% recommend getting her to at least module level 1 if you're going to use Holiak. But her module talent upgrades is also not bad. because it makes her talent 1 almost twice as good. But if you're not going to use Holhayak all that much, I still wouldn't recommend it, as 6-star module upgrades require a lot of tier 5 mats. Moving on to her skills, all of them inflict levitate onto enemies, synergizing with both of her talents. Her skill 1, In Search of Reason, lets her hit a second enemy, both hits doing significantly increased damage on those hits. If there's only one enemy in range, she will also levitate said enemy for 4 seconds. For all her skills, by the way, she will always levitate before the damage instance occurs, so she always benefits from her own talent. This skill doesn't seem bad on paper, but if compared to similar skills like Aya's S2, which deals more single target damage, is true AoE, lower SP cost, and has a perma 25% resistance shred thanks to her SP cost and the resistance shred duration. Although I do have to say that a 4-second levitate with only 7 SP cost is pretty good crowd control, although she does not levitate at all if there's more than one enemy in her range, so it isn't even that reliable. I do like to say that this skill is more of an upgraded minimalist skill rather than comparing it to Aya's skill 2. Overall, I wouldn't recommend putting masteries into this skill at all. There's just much better alternatives, even if you want to use this skill in integrated strategies with Wrath of the Surikosanos. I'd recommend you building her other skills more for the new Levitate collectibles in Integrated Strategies 4. Her skill 2, Meandering Stars, changes her attack to a 9-hit burst, hitting random enemies within her range for about half of her current attack, each hit having a 15% chance to levitate the enemy for 1 second. Yeah, this skill is an Amiya caster S2 side grade. But realistically, the on-skill DPS of this skill is very similar to Amiya's skill 2, the only significant difference being that the skill cycling is much better with Holhayak, and she doesn't get stunned after. I will say that this skill has a very good synergy with Quanipalat, since his levitate lasts for 7 seconds, which is basically half of her skill duration. Quanipalat having great synergy with her in general, since he inflicts Art's Fragility to all aerial enemies within his range. I do personally like using this skill, but for general use, I would not really recommend putting any masteries on this skill at all, like I did. Lastly, her skill 3, Well-Read Ravings. This is her bread and butter skill. It's what you would want her to use 9 times out of 10. She changes her attack to 3 tornadoes that start off on her tile and the 2 tiles adjacent to her. The tornadoes then go forward in her extended range, dealing more damage the farther the tornadoes are from the starting tile, maxing out after traveling 3 tiles. All hits levitating the enemy for 2.2 seconds. Despite how it looks, these tornadoes do not deal splash damage. Despite what some people might say, this skill actually does quite a bit of damage, since it has a fairly long skill duration of 45 seconds. The only downside I would say is the unnecessarily long downtime of 60 seconds, as this skill isn't really good enough to have that long of a downtime. A downtime of 50 seconds would honestly make a big difference in my opinion. Maybe even 45 seconds to make the skill uptime 50%. Lots of people say that her tornado should have pierced through enemies, and seeing her damage when I tested her out, that'll definitely make her quite busted. I would say on the same level as the top tier DPS units. But with all that said and done, it's time to show what she can actually do in a stage. So despite all of her skills having the potential to hit multiple enemies, from my experience you wouldn't really want her to deal with too many enemies at the same time. She deals with high threat enemies really well, but they would need to be staggered in spawns. This goes for all of her skills. Since S1 only hits up to 2 enemies, skills 2 effectiveness goes down the more enemies there are in range, since she hits random enemies, and S3 of course dealing no splash, so if enemies are on the same tile, only one tornado will hit only one enemy. Take for example this stage, 11-12, where she can take down the middle lane where the mobile artillery spawn. Aside from attacking 2 lanes at the same time with her S3, her stalling capability is also in showcase here, as she prevents the artillery from attacking by levitating it. Now, as Holheok takes that down in the background, I'll quickly talk about her synergies. As I've mentioned earlier, she has a synergy with Quanipalat, as he gives 20% arts fragility to anyone that Holheok levitates. Now of course, Holheok also benefits from anyone that gives enemies arts fragility in the first place, but those operators usually only reliably give fragility when their skill is active. And shut up, let me have this. She also works wonderfully with any operator that gives attack buffs, since it would stack multiplicatively with Holheok's S3. Little side note, if you didn't know how you can tell if something stacks additively or multiplicatively with attack buffers, you can tell by how the skill is worded. If a skill gives plus 100% attack, buffers would stack additively. If the skill deals 200% of attack, then it would stack multiplicatively. In this stage, I wanted to show the synergy with Quanipalat and the fast cycling of S2 at the same time. Activating both Quanipalat and Holheok's skill here easily takes down Manfred's first phase. Now, I admit that there's a lot of casters that can take down Manfred once his evasion is gone, but the distinction here is that most casters that would be able to take down Manfred as fast as this in phase 1 would probably not have their skill up again once Manfred is stunned by the cannon again in phase 2. Holheok and Quanipalat here have already charged their skill, and one more activation takes care of Manfred's phase 2 as early as possible. Now, onto some nerd shit, just to maximize the potential DPS that Holheok has for her S3. Now, even though her 3 tornadoes only hit enemies on the tiles they each specifically go through, there is still a way for 2 of her tornadoes to hit a single enemy by wedging an enemy onto 2 tiles. This is called split boxing, making the enemy's hitbox occupy 2 tiles at the same time. As you can imagine, doubling Holheok's damage is incredible for her DPS. Even though Emperor's Blade here cannot be levitated, Holheok still takes care of his entire phase 1, even though her ASPD is being significantly slowed down by Emperor's Blade. Her damage stacking multiplicatively with buffs, and her dealing 2 hits, makes her total damage kinda nuts, especially when buffed. To show this, I made her take down both of Tallulah's phases with only 1 skill activation per phase, while being aided by Stainless on S1. Thanks to the fact that her skill 3 lasts as long as it does, it makes the total damage of the skill quite high, especially when split boxing an enemy, her total single target damage even surpassing the likes of Muinar and Surtur, as I will show their performance against Tallulah here as well. Surtur and Muinar here both easily taking down Tallulah's phase 1 with just a Stainless S1 buff as well. But both failed to kill phase 2 Tallulah under the same conditions. Now, am I saying Holheok is better than either Surtur or Muinar? Yes! Are you brainwashed yet? No? Okay, for the last showcase, I want to show something that's going on right now. And lucky that in the boss stage for So Long Adele, the boss voluntarily stays between 2 tiles and just stays there for a while. All in all, Holheok is, in my opinion, very fun to play. Kinda like Ebonholes and other operators people usually think of as bad, it's just really satisfying seeing them excel in the niches they were made for, and them even doing a better job than the meta operators. Anyway, that'll be all from me. I hope you enjoyed this video. If I got anything wrong, please inform me since I'm always looking to be better. Bye bye.